As a state, Texas has poured billions of taxpayer dollars and attention into holding our public schools accountable. But now, there are some lawmakers trying to orchestrate a drastic change that would siphon money from public schools into private entities with no accountability or oversight. That change is vouchers. Say no to vouchers, no to ESAs, and yes to the strong, thriving public school system Texas students and families deserve.
Well, good morning. Morning, everyone. I'm Matt Ewald, our Director of Events and Live Journalism at the Texas Tribune. Thank you for joining us online and in person here in Austin at the Tribune Studio 919 for our conversation on how Texas public schools are faring following the 2023 legislative session and what educators, lawmakers, and advocates are expecting from a forthcoming special session. Today's program is moderated by the Tribune's public education reporter, Brian Lopez. Our panel includes State Senator Brandon Creighton, Stephanie Elizalde, Superintendent of Dallas Independent School District, and Laura Herrera, a pre-K teacher at Harmony Hills Elementary School in the Northeast Independent School District. And as the conversation today turns to education savings accounts and the upcoming special session, in the latter part of the program, we'll also welcome to the stage Laura Colangelo, Executive Director of the Texas Private Schools Association. I want to take a moment to thank today's sponsors. Our major sponsors are the Association of Texas Professional Educators, Educate Texas at Communities Foundation of Texas, Philanthropy Advocates, a collaboration with Educate Texas, Raptor Technologies, Raise Your Hand Texas, the Texas Association of School Boards, and the Texas Association of School Business Officials. Our foundation sponsors include the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Berdine Johnson Foundation, and the Sid W. Richardson Foundation. Though corporate sponsors and donors underwrite this event, they play no role in determining the content, speakers, or line of questioning. The Texas Tribune summer campaign is going on now, and we're asking folks like you to help support our ongoing coverage of the future of education in Texas, from the public education system to colleges and admissions. Help us go even deeper on these topics. Donate as little as $1 to join as a member at texastribune.org/donate. Students and educators, you are invited to connect the classroom with current events at the 2023 Texas Tribune Festival. TribFest is Texas's breakout politics and policy event happening September 21st through 23rd here in downtown Austin. Hear from national and state lawmakers and thought leaders as they talk about school funding, teacher pay, education standards, vouchers, regulating Texas higher education, and many other topics that matter to students, educators, and everyday Texans alike. Get a front row seat to conversations with speakers you know and others you should. Ticket discount and bulk rates are available for students and educators. Students attend TribFest for just $50, and current educators, faculty, and staff enjoy general admission to TribFest for just $75. Learn more at tribfest.org. Some housekeeping notes about today's program. We'll have about 45 minutes for our conversation, with 15 minutes for questions from the audience. With a packed room here in the studio, we're likely to have plenty of questions from our in-person audience, and we'll try to be flexible with our time, but I also ask for your grace if we're not able to get to your question due to time. As referenced earlier, as our conversation turns to education savings accounts and the upcoming special session, we'll have Laura Colangelo join the panel. Ask you to please silence your cell phones, and if you'd like to tweet from this event, please use the hashtag #TTEvents. So let's introduce our panelists. State Senator Brandon Creighton, serving District 4, leads both the Senate committees on public education and higher education, joining 2 consequential committees to advance bill reforms for the future of Texas and ensuring the next generation is prepared for a 21st century economy. He also serves as a key member of Senate Finance and as a member of numerous committees, including Business and Commerce and Jurisprudence. Stephanie Elizalde was elected by the Board of Trustees in June 2022 to serve as superintendent of the Dallas Independent School District. She is a third-generation public school educator, following in the footsteps of her grandmother and father. She earned a Bachelor of Science degree in biology and a Master of Arts degree in educational leadership from UT San Antonio, and holds a doctorate in educational leadership and policy from UT Austin. Elizalde previously served as superintendent of the Austin Independent School District. Laura Herrera, a pre-K teacher at Harmony Hills Elementary School in the Northeast Independent School District, is a native of San Antonio and a Baylor University graduate. She has served 20 years in the same district and at the same campus of her community. She is heavily involved with her Teachers Association, ATPE, and has been a member since 2004. And Laura Colangelo is the executive director of the Texas Private Schools Association, an advocacy organization representing over 900 private accredited schools in Texas, in the state legislature, and in DC. In this role, she is the public voice of private schools in Texas. And now, to begin today's program and get things going, here is our moderator for today's event, Brian Lopez.
Well, thank you guys. Good morning. Thank you panelists for being here and having this hour-long conversation. That's what we'll aim for it to be. So we'll get right into it. On May 29th, regular session is over. We started in January with, obviously a $32 billion plus surplus, a lot of great ambition for public education. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, talking about teacher raises, school funding, and of course, things like curriculum, parental choice, and things of that nature. So I want to start with each one of you first. What are some key takeaways from the regular session, some wins, and maybe some missed opportunities?
Okay, good to be here with all of you. Appreciate the invitation, and certainly to share the stage with, each of our panelists and for the question. It's time to sort of reflect on what happened during the session, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And where we'll be headed next, and what we are all expecting to be a special session in the near future on education. So with the good, I think it was very clear that the House and the Senate placed public education and certainly school safety at the top of our priority list for many of the different issues that were driving the session as we came in January. The border, the grid, tax reform, healthcare and healthcare reform, safety across the board, just making sure that our priorities within our schools and what we pass as policy and within the budget will protect them going forward. And we see that now, right? With the budget that we passed, we clearly indicated in the legislature between the House and the Senate that there will be a commitment of almost $9 billion of new money for education as a whole, and that we're one of maybe 12 states in America that commit half of the Texas of its state budget to, among those states, to education as a whole. And that is strong for Texans to see, that's strong for the nation to see. And with that money that is currently parked in the Texas budget, that indicates that where we fell short on the school finance bill and teacher pay raises, as we couldn't agree between the House and the Senate on not just those issues, but a few others, as we just sort of landed the plane on tax reform and tax relief. We'll get there. And it's frustrating when we don't get everything done in that 141 days for the 9th largest economy in the world, but it's also, it's somewhat looking through history of our legislative sessions and back to when I worked those sessions on public school finance in the late 80s and early 90s. It wasn't much different of a story then. There were multiple special sessions following, you know, times where we had money to spend, but we had to figure out exactly the best way to spend it. So with school safety, with relaxing House Bill 4545, with advancing bills that it sort of readdressed ballot language for bond initiatives and referendums, that bill didn't pass, but it showed that the legislature is continuing to listen. And it's a process, right? So when we come back in the special, all of these priorities will culminate and we'll deploy the money that was set aside and already approved in the budget.
Stephanie Fielding.
Sure. Thank you so much. And I do want to say, I think it's always easy to be outside the arena and criticize. I have no idea how the legislature works, nor do I want to be a part of any of that. And I think I need to stay in my lane. So sincerely, thank you to the senator and to everyone who does that work. And respectfully, thank you for prioritizing safety. However, that came with 28 cents. And I can't buy a key for 28 cents when we talk about safety. And $15,000 a campus for armed officers when in Dallas ISD, that costs us with salary and benefits somewhere around $85,000. And we know that the governor put together a great teacher task force to talk about vacancies, and it is very, very frustrating because we had such high hopes. Certainly as educators, we did hear the prioritization of both the Senate and the House with regard to teachers, and I was really quite sure that we were gonna get something for our teachers. Most of the superintendents I know had to go into deficit budgets in order to be able to provide any kind of raises. And I so respect that Texas is the 9th largest economy in the world, and we still rank 43rd in public school funding. I still get $6,160 per student, and I am hopeful that in October that can be something that could be addressed because we know inflation since 2019 has affected everything. So whether we're talking teachers or custodians or counselors or our cafeteria workers or our principals, all of their costs of living have increased, and yet we haven't seen any of those types of increases in public school funding. And so, I think there are some great things also as we look to the session. I certainly, as a property owner, thankful that there was an agreement reached. We all benefited from property taxes. And then there was an article in the Dallas Morning News that reminded us in Dallas County, only 48% of our population are homeowners. 52% pay rent. So I was wondering how many of those landlords are actually going to call up people and say they're going to lower the rent. I'm not going to hold my breath that that's going to happen. So I think that there's still hope. There's still some disappointment. And certainly if we can be a part of assisting in that coming to fruition, we don't want to forget that the teachers are still the cornerstone of the work that is called public education.
Thank you for having me. I just want to say, I think from my perspective, I think our school districts across Texas are trying to do their very best to keep up with inflation, and they're listening to teachers. And the governor's task force was disappointing because there were so many good ideas that came out of the task force. And I feel as teachers, we always want a seat at the table. We want to be a part of that decision making. But when we're a part of the decision making and when that goes askew, it's a little bit disappointing as usual. But I feel like districts are going to have their hands tied. They have given salary raises, but that at the same time, they're going to be in a budget shortfall, which is going to mean less money for our schools and less money for our staff and students.
Speaking of, that teacher task force, met for about a year, had those recommendations, right? I think one of the ones that, some of the task force work kind of made into it was House Bill 1605, the big curriculum bill, which you had a Senate version and worked on it with, Representative Brad Buckley in the House. Talk to me, Senator, what was the vision, what is the vision, what is the goal behind that, bill that has a lot of money poured into it? And then, after Senator is kind of done with that, we'll go into, you educators, what do you think the bill will do? And some of the things that, that it aims to do is like, save teachers' time and from that planning and things like that. So, Senator, if you want to go and talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So the curriculum effort in House Bill 1605, which Chairman Buckley and I worked very closely together on that legislation and had a great partnership with Chairman Buckley all during the session. I think he did a wonderful job, but as was the case on many of the bills we advanced, it's teacher and educator driven, right? So in visiting with school districts across the state after the Lieutenant Governor asked me to serve as the chair of public education when Senator Larry Taylor announced his retirement. I traveled from Beaumont ISD to El Paso ISD, from North Texas school districts to the Valley, and in between, and time again, we were hearing not just from teacher surveys, but from teachers themselves that there was a list of priority set that they had that really they wanted us to address in the legislative session, and we hope to do exactly that. So most of those teacher surveys indicated that compensation was third and sometimes fourth on the list. Now, it was at the top of the list, so without a doubt, it has to be a priority set that is at the very, very top, and it was and is and remains to be. But time spent preparing to educate our kids was also at the very top of the list, just being overworked. And the curriculum bill itself will save an estimate of, there's different estimates on the time frames. It'll save teachers in their work week, but between 7 and 9 hours a week, where we will have rigor addressed and we will have issues related to, kids performing out of the 5.4 or 5.5 million public school kids. There's a pretty good percentage of those kids that are performing below grade level. So making sure that a curriculum is available to school districts, it's a may, right? It's not a must or a shall. So school districts can decide if they want to use the curriculum that will be provided and developed with not just the TEA, teachers, administrators, the SBOE, all involved with developing that curriculum, but school districts still will have the option to not use it. But the funding is there. The funding is $40 per student and another $20 for the sort of the administrative side and providing exactly what needs to happen before it hits the classroom. And we were very determined to deliver that bill. I think it's a landmark piece of legislation. I was disappointed that a lot of the education advocates weren't more vocal in support of the effort, because I think it's going to be a national model for what other states will do to follow, to address learning gaps and rigor and just where we need to be taking steps forward. And I'm very eager for school districts to take advantage of it. But the $700 million plus that was sort of a starting place for the budget to provide the dollars needed for the curriculum itself, obviously projected our goals and intentions, and we'll hear more and we'll continue to listen more from districts as they use and implement that curriculum, and also how the dollars work exactly. So I think that across the board, all of these things fit together in synergies, right? A safe classroom, a really sound and reasonable learning environment that promotes the best interests of every child in the classroom and their diverse needs. And this curriculum effort will be certainly a huge launch for that effort.
And Superintendent, just a little bit about.
Yeah, I definitely want to thank the chairman and the senator for HQIM. Dallas, I certainly had our chief academic officer testify in support of the materials. I thank that it is a may, because not every district may see this as something that fits its requirements. In Dallas ISD, and we have been very vocal, talking about the support and how much time for teachers this will alleviate. Now in Dallas ISD, we absolutely, and I hope that some of the things that we can do is focus on both ands as opposed to either ors. I think the polarization sometimes of some of our different perspectives is taking away from what the actual intent of public schools is to do. And so and with this in particular, not only is it going to help our teachers, we have approximately, on average, somewhere between 22 or 24% intra-district mobility. So when you serve a variety of diverse students like we do, we embrace them in Dallas ISD. We are the Statue of Liberty. We take everyone. And so in that process, when you have that type of intra-district mobility, students need a comprehensive and a cohesive curriculum, right? Because if you're going from, you're going to campus A and the rent goes up and parents can't continue to afford there, they need to go to campus B, it's still within a district because there's a new special in a particular apartment area. So those are the realities of many of the children that we serve. And so when they go to another school, if you're using a totally different curriculum, we're now adding an additional hurdle for students. So I'm very, very fortunate that the teachers in Dallas ISD continue to put students at the center of their decision making. And so the teachers are embracing that. We've had an entire curriculum summer summit with principals, assistant principals, and we brought in teacher teams. We piloted the high quality instructional materials last year also, so that our teachers could also understand what are some of the things that are gonna work and what are some of the things we need to tweak. Because at the end of the day, whatever program you bring in, I always have to remember that the teacher is truly the program. Because if the curriculum isn't matched with the teacher being able to truly know the students and how to implement the curriculum isn't the solution. But did we need to remove time from teachers writing lessons and lesson plans? You know, I asked our principals, how many of you are actually reviewing the lesson plans that the teachers are writing and turning in? No one raised their hand, just like this room. So what ended up happening, I'm like, so why are we having teachers write lesson plans? So when you adopt a curriculum that we know is on grade level, that also allows for scaffolds so that we ensure that students are on grade level, then in that perspective, we can, and I completely agree, we see that this will be a reduction of at least 1.5 hours daily for teachers, so that we can actually return the time for teachers to be able to focus on how they're delivering the lesson, instead of all scrambling to figure out, well, what am I going to use for this particular lesson? So that comprehensive, cohesive curriculum, I think, was a big highlight of the session, and I'm thankful that that was an area of support, and that the funding, I would have preferred statutory funding, but I'll take the historical funding that we got.
Well, I can talk from teachers' perspective when it comes to resources that districts give us and the state is giving us. I think it's a great resource, but at the same time, I feel like a lot of things are always put in teachers' laps, and we're expected to fulfill these expectations that the district wants us to do, but not a lot of time to adjust to each new research philosophy that comes along, whether it become, I was a part of the Reading Academy. And then when I was a pre-K teacher last year, I had to go through the Letters Academy. So it's a lot of professional development, a lot of research, a lot of things that are coming up in education, how to best practices in the classroom. And I feel like there are so many other things to be concentrating and focusing on that lesson plan probably wasn't on the top of my list. Like, I can plan lessons in my dreams probably. And I feel like as a teacher, this is my 21st year in education, the joy of learning, the joy of educating young children is why I'm still in education. And I always look at it as like an artist's canvas, you know, like you're painting, but I feel like these scripted lesson plans, these scripted curriculum kind of ties our hands a little bit. I agree that children need routine, cohesiveness, and all of those things, but I feel like there are so many other things to be focusing on that I don't really think that this was part, like, on the top of a teacher's list of, oh gosh, that's gonna take a lot off my plate now. You know, there's so many other things. I think that children I work in a Title I school, so I feel like the children that are coming to me, it's even hard to get to the curriculum when I'm trying to teach them their executive function skills, you know? Their working memory, their inhibitory control, their cognitive flexibility, their ability to work with others and share, and, you know, all the ins and outs of a classroom, I feel. And a lot of those things get interrupted when I'm trying to do a scripted lesson. It's not gonna, I'm not a robot. I'm not a robot, and I've always kind of been like, I can't do the same thing like the other teacher down the hallway is doing, and that's what makes education so special.
Moving on a little bit to, you know, one of the bills that didn't, you know, make it through that was a top of the list, like, I want this from, you know, from superintendents that I spoke to. It's HB 100 by Rep. Ken King. First, you know, I'll start with you, Laura. You know, obviously that had, you know, money for teacher raises. Yeah. Talk to me, you know, what that, you know, means to you that that didn't pass, and then, you know, we'll go from there.
Sure. Again, like I said, this is my 21st year in education. If I'm being very frank, I live paycheck to paycheck, you know? I'm paying $1,500 rent in San Antonio. You're from San Antonio too, so you know the rent prices. So that doesn't leave me with a very much, I come from a single household. I'm a single gal. I don't have a double income coming in my household. So it does stretch the money a little, you know, tight. I just feel like we are expected to do superhero things, but then in our profession, we're not paid the way that we are expected, you know? I feel like all of my colleagues, I have several colleagues who work several jobs, and I know everybody hears that. Teachers are working second jobs, third jobs, to keep up with inflation. And I know districts are trying to help with that, but it's not enough. It's not enough.
And then superintendent, from a, you know, school official administrator kind of perspective.
So, I mean, everybody that says money isn't important, as I reflect, are all the people with the money. So I kind of, you know, I knew when I started and decided to go into education that I was not, I mean, you weren't going into education because it was going to be a high income career. We knew that. But I don't know that we were expecting folks to take a vow of poverty to end up serving in public ed. And so I think we had high hopes, again, for that particular legislation. And right now, not every district that is large and has the reserves that a Dallas ISD had, and I use past tense because when I say we had to go into a deficit budget in order to create just a small raise. I mean, our teachers in Dallas ISD ended up receiving somewhere on average about 3.3%. But inflation since 2019 has neared somewhere like, you know, depending on whoever, if you want to look at the smallest number, right, 13, 14% inflation. And so in order to do that, that was a $165 million deficit budget. Now, this is my 36th year in education. I was 12 when I started. And in that process, as we've done that, we can't continue each year. Salaries are not one-time expenditures, right? These are recurring costs, because next year, where do I find the 165 again just to keep the salaries that we paid this year? And so it's not that it's a one-time thing, it's that, you know, you can't make your mortgage payment with your credit card. You've got to be able to have money. Our revenue has to be able to equate to our expenditures. Now, were there things we needed to do as a district? Because again, I'm going to go back to a both and. This can't be all on just one particular group or one entity. This is something that we have to absolutely work together to resolve. Were there things in the district that we needed to do to be more efficient? Absolutely. We also trimmed central office staff. We had to return some positions that were reporting to central back to the classroom to help the teachers. You know, we certainly did listen to teachers with regard to some of the requests that they have. So I think, and I'm still hopeful that in the next session that there will be something, because people will recognize, regardless of different areas in which all of our public services may need improvement, that it's still the cornerstone of what we call the Texas Constitution, Article 7. I mean, educate at no cost to every single student in the state of Texas.
And then, Senator, you know, you had, I believe it was SB 9, which would have given a one-time bonus or a one-time payment for teachers depending on school district size. It didn't end up making it out of that, you know, House. You know, HB 100. Obviously, we'll get into a little bit more what happened there here when Laura joins us. But what do you think needs to happen in this, you know, next special session to get, you know, both sides on agreement on how to reach, you know, whatever that next HB 100 may be?
Yeah, and your original question was about HB 100, right? And HB 100 was the last train out, right? I mean, there was a lot of policy that was advanced, significant policy on behalf of teachers and school funding, separate from HB 100, that just for one reason or another, the one chamber, the House or the Senate, just chose not to advance. So at the very end of the session, that left HB 100 to be sort of this super bill related to this omnibus effort related to school finance and teacher pay and other issues like school choice and parental rights and teacher rights, right? It culminated into a bill that reflected what the Senate had sent to the House in separate measures. And for some reason, the most significant teacher rights bill in the nation that included, you call it a bonus, I call it a teacher pay raise. We're a biennial budget, right? I mean, we can't predict as California is finding now with last session, they had a $100 billion surplus, and this session they have a $24 billion deficit. We can't predict where we will be. But we pass, as we fund all other areas of the budget, a 2-year budget, and we were proposing that in Senate Bill 9 on behalf of teachers, along with significant teacher rights that tied directly to safety, where violent propensity students could be removed from the classroom, and even if the principal wanted to put that student back in the classroom, the teacher would have to sign off on it for the first time ever. And that was rejected. And I didn't hear any Maydays. I didn't hear any superintendents or any education organizations rallying on the steps of the Capitol to pass that teacher Bill of Rights that would have advocated repealing the windfall provision at the federal level so that teachers could take their deceased spouse's Social Security benefits, or make sure, again, that classrooms are safe or that teachers are paid more, and all the other provisions in the Teacher Bill of Rights that would have made their voices heard in ways that administrators just are not listening based on those teacher surveys, which, by the way, that is the #1 concern for teachers across the state, is the lack of accountability and being heard in their schools by their administrators. Teacher pay was 2nd and 3rd, and I even saw 4th on some of the surveys on the list. So school choice was separate from teacher pay all the way through the session. Based on the Senate's intentions, it was tied to parental rights in Senate Bill 8. Teacher pay and teacher rights were bundled together based on the Senate's preference. But at the end, when those bills were killed, we had House Bill 100, and that was the last train out. That seems to be only the focus of the narrative of how the session was couched. And I think that's either disingenuous or sort of just misunderstood, whichever word we want to use or however it applies. But we had significant funding initiatives for public schools. Even Raise Your Hand Texas publishes that based on the allotments that are funded by the state, the average student in Texas is right around $10,000, not just north of $6,000, as the superintendent mentioned. So when we're working on raising the basic allotment, and when we're working on putting $3.7 billion into teacher pay, we have to make sure that we know that the clock is running. And when games are played with those bills and they're sniped by very, very skilled snipers through the session, and then at the last moment, one bill is left to put all these issues in as a last chance effort on the last train out. We have to give a perspective on the session and a narrative that actually is accurate from January to May. And House Bill 100 just showed both chambers were working the best they could after those other very significant, impactful pro-teacher bills were killed.
Got it. Well, now we'll invite Laura, and we'll get started on the second part where we'll talk about, what's next in that special session, and of course, another big topic that was heard in public education committees, both in the House and Senate, school choice and education savings account.
Very good.
Hi. Well, thank you, Laura, for being here again. So, Senator, I'll start with you. Obviously, this was an issue, a priority in the Senate, a priority for Governor Greg Abbott, a priority for you. Talk to us about what this next couple of months, what you're working on to kind of get this through, to get your priority through, and what happened during that, from January to May that, kind of derailed not only that, but also, teacher prep bills and obviously teacher pay bills as well.
So for the question specific, just my perspective on the school choice effort, how it was sort of launched and where the Senate prioritized it through the session. So Senate Bill 8 was a signature piece of legislation that was tied together with parental rights and education freedom being coupled together in the same bill. So the education landscape in Texas is very different, even as it was 3 to 4 years ago. And parents are asking for choices and options to direct the outcome of their child's education more than ever. And many of those parents don't go to school board public hearings, right? Many of those parents are in the offices of their legislators, and certainly we hear them loud and clear. And the governor traveling the state, he didn't establish school choice as an emergency item because traveling the state during the election against Beto O'Rourke told him that school choice was not the preference of most Texas parents. He established school choice as an emergency item because he heard that parents across this state not only preferenced it, but demanded it. So with kids in certain failing schools that need choices and options, with coalitions that approach the legislature, grandparent coalitions on behalf of children with autism, asking for help and for opportunities for their kids, that again is not within a narrative that those trying to achieve school choice and maybe 50, 60,000 kids out of 5.4 million might be able, within the Texas budget, to have opportunities that might help those particular kids. Education outcomes driven by those moms and dads would be any threat to public schools. And we hear these narratives that anyone that is for school choice is trying to decimate the sticks and bricks of public schools and tear them down. It's just absurd. It's just absolutely absurd that 50 or 60,000 children that need help in other alternatives would be a threat to public schools. So as we put an effort together for $9 billion of new money to be put into public schools, the equivalent of the state budgets of 11 states, we set $500 million aside separate from public school funding, like the border and tax reform and the grid and many other issues, for that effort. And that was Senate Bill 8 that ultimately did not pass the House and that we will readdress in the special.
Go ahead. We'll go down in order real quick. Do you want to say something?
Can I?
Yeah, go
Since
ahead.
I just joined,
Yeah.
can I? Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And I'm excited to talk about this idea, but I want to be very clear that as an organization, Texas Private Schools Association, we've studied this issue I have for 10 years, the association for 20 years, and we've looked at every study. I talked to my colleagues in the 32 other states that have programs like this regularly. And if we thought that this was going to do harm to public schools, I would not be sitting here talking to you about this. So I just want to be very clear about that. We respect and admire these ladies, all of our friends in public schools, and we see ourselves as partners in this effort to educate the children of Texas.
Superintendent, from your perspective, what do you think about, eventually that this didn't pass and that it'll be, another topic of discussion?
Yeah, so if we go back to how popular and how much of demand this is, then I would respectfully request that private school subsidies be a legislation that could stand on its own. Why hold hostage public school funding? If this isn't in any way to harm public schools, then let's work together. Choice has always been something that we've continued to expand even in our public schools. For instance, in Dallas, we have a variety of different opportunities that are in fact a result of parent input. And when parents say they want a focus in STEM education or STEAM or a focus in the arts or a focus in robotics, a focus and partnerships with business industry. Let us not forget that public schools produce the largest amount of workforce. This is about the economy of the state of Texas. And so I think that private school subsidies are something, and honestly, we've even expanded choice in Texas to a great deal with charters. That's even another publicly funded choice that already exists. So I think there's a lot of choice, and I absolutely think there is a place, and in fact, we too should support and work. And in fact, in Dallas, we partner with many private schools. Students become big brothers and big sisters of some of our students, and we're very proud of those partnerships. They assist and provide a lot of support to many of our schools. And then just lastly is the whole notion of accountability. If in addition, if all of the accountability is good for public schools, the testing that is required, the curriculum, we teach what the state approves for us to teach. The Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills goes through the state of Texas. And so if all of that is good for public schools, then we only ask that that competition include that then our private school friends should also have to have the same level of accountability and requirements and oversight and regulation, because fair is fair. And so if we end up in that situation, or we do end up with private school subsidies, then I would simply request that the same that's good for public schools should also then be a part of the private school subsidies.
Well, they're not private school subsidies. They are ways for families to get to access the education that they need. And this is, again, 50,000 children across the entire state of Texas. So there will not be an exodus from public schools. There will be just the families that need another option. The kids that are doing well in public schools are going to stay in public schools. And we want that. And we want to help our public schools in the way that we've been discussing, that you all have been discussing before. But this is just a way for families who need another option, whose child is not being served for whatever reason, to access another option. And if they choose a private school, that they're able to do that. The rich kids already have choice, and we're just asking that families that can't afford private schools that need another option have that opportunity.
Well, I mean, I work at a Title I school, so those families come from a low socioeconomic status. They use this voucher, but public schools pay for transportation. Public schools pay for meals. Public schools pay for books. You know, all of those expenses, how is a family coming from a Title I school going to be able to afford a private school education when all of those things will not be included? You know, and like 50 or 60,000 students, if those funds are coming from state, then they, like Superintendent said, the accountability should be there. Like we are expected to be accountable for.
Well, we're about to open it up for questions in about 5 minutes, so we'll ask the last round. Senator Creighton, first, you know, what a lot of people are wondering, and obviously, you know, you probably don't want to say what the tactics look like or the political kind of football that may be played in a special district, but, you know, a lot of people are saying or asking, is this something that's going to be tied together going forward? Are you know, teachers' raises and school choice or education savings account? And just to follow up on everything else, you know, what are your expectations for this upcoming session?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I mean, we're working on the best strategies for the special session now, and we had to get through the special session on tax reform really to focus on it. We've got some other duties in the Senate, right, coming up in September. So we've got to get through that also. But I know the superintendent mentioned frustration with those subjects being tied together. But again, the point I made earlier, 80% of the regular session from January to May, 80% of the session, the subjects were separated, right? So there needs to be a mention of both. There needs to be sort of maybe a comment related to, I liked the Senate plan on the way the Senate launched the effort of protecting teachers like no other state in the country is doing, paying teachers a $3.7 billion pay raise, and separating from that effort school choice and parental rights into its own bill in Senate Bill 8 for 80% of the session, right? And then when those bills were killed, there was an omnibus bill that had a caption that you could drive a truck through, right? The caption was germane for all education subjects, House Bill 100, and all those issues were poured into that bill. So we have to decide. I mean, we've seen Iowa and Utah and many other states couple together teacher pay raises and school choice, and I don't know if we did couple those together that it would be inappropriate. It's just about a strategy, right? School finance and teacher pay and the impact of education savings accounts and whatever impact that might have on public schools, it is appropriate to have that conversation all in the same debate. There is not anything wrong with keeping those together, but again, the Senate plan in 8 and 9, teacher pay over here and ESAs over here, was 80% of the session until the House chose to go a different direction. And we followed because we were out of time. Now, I'm all for parity in the way fairness affects public schools. For instance, charter schools, if they fail 2 years in a row, they close. Public schools are open forever. Listen, I've been through, as a legislator, TEA taking, if there's true parity and we want public schools to fall under that parity, then I think under the superintendent's argument, we need to make sure that if public schools continue to fail, there's accountability. And if there's not accountability, what's fair is fair, right? So we have to make sure that as we launch the effort for school choice in the session, it continues to be an emergency item because our parents demand it. It's not a typical voucher. It's an education savings account that does account for transportation. But again, parents don't have to use it, right? If parents love their public schools, if Title I is the issue, or parents decide, you know what, there's a gap there in what that private school tuition might cost, which, by the way, is an average of $9,000 across the state. If there's a gap there that I just don't want to try to fill, I'm staying with my public school. There's not a mandate.
Well, actually, private schools have scholarships to fill that delta.
And private schools have the scholarships, but still, the average tuition is not much different than the ESA at $8,000. And as Raise Your Hand says, most public schools per student get about $10,000 when you average all the allotments together, and we're increasing that with our school funding effort. It's all going to fit together. The synergy is going to work. The other states under Republican and Democrat governors are on their third and fourth iteration over 30 years. It has not been a negative to public schools under 175 different empirical studies. It's actually been good for them. We're going to be fine in this effort, in this protectionist mindset that, again, protects institutions instead of the child. Even the 7 public school educators in my family agree that it would not harm public schools.
Well, it would be nice also, I think, if we would say that we like that public schools take each and every student, regardless of what their background is. And I don't think that that this is absolutely, if this were not about kids, I think we absolutely can have a stream of different experiences and perspectives. To think that educators would be putting an organization above students is completely opposite of what public school educators do each and every day. And I absolutely think there is a way to have a both and. I do not think it's fair to say that there's a protectionist because we're concerned that if this were for each and every student, in Dallas, that is not the average of the private schools. I mean, Green Hill, Hockaday, St. Mark's, those are upwards of $25,000, $30,000. There is not a way for those dollars, $8,000, to be able, for parents to be able to access those schools. And so if this were truly about that, and those schools do in fact have scholarships and do very well
robust scholarship
with helping,
programs.
and we help even provide referrals for students that we think this is a great opportunity, and we continue to partner with that. I think the thought that we are on opposite ends, I don't think that's a characterization. certainly of Dallas ISD. We want to continue to stay focused on students and ensure that every single student is getting that education, and we'll continue to ensure that we continue to improve, because we do know that every single person does want, I think everyone in the legislature also wants what's best for kids. We may just have a different viewpoint of trying to get there.
Real quick, Laura, Colangelo, special session, what you'll be looking out for?
Well, we'll continue the discussion, the robust discussion we had during the regular session, and talk about education savings accounts. We're going to look for prioritizing children, low-income children, special needs children, making sure the children that need the scholarships would get those scholarships. 98% of my schools want to participate in a program like this. They're ready. They already have millions of dollars in scholarships they give out now, because to have a truly quality educational experience, you have to have a diversity of viewpoints of students in your classroom. So there's a lot of scholarship money going out to create that kind of quality educational atmosphere. So this is only augmenting what is already in place in the private schools, and it's just allowing more families access to this kind of education. And I talk to my heads of school all the time, and they just are sick when they have to turn families away that can't afford the school because the scholarship money has run out. And so that is what private schools are thinking right now. We're going to make sure that the kids that need it get it, and that there is accountability in our accreditation. Private schools administer norm reference tests, so there is testing going on in private schools to make sure the children are making progress year over year. We want to see that in the bills that come out. We want to make sure that we're going to get the data that we need on those children, those scholarship children, so that we can see if it works. I think we are going to see that it does work based on what I've from the 32 other states that have this, and we're ready to get started.
Ms. Herrera, from a teachers, what are you going to be looking out for lawmakers, and you know what you're hopeful they'll pass?
Just to go back a little bit about what Senator Creighton said about, we didn't hear anything from the teachers associations or teachers. Teachers are in the classroom. I haven't had a substitute in the last 2 years. There are staff shortages all over Texas. My school is short-staffed this year. So to expect teachers to come and travel to Austin and get a substitute and be there in person is a hard job to do sometimes. And I've had opportunities with Teach Plus Texas. I was in their policy fellowship, so I was up at the Capitol quite often. Last year, I was a policy, an alum of the Fellowship of Retaining Recruiting Teachers of Color. We've got a retaining and recruiting problem in Texas for teachers. So there's other things to be focused on, and school choice has always been there. It's always been there in all districts in Texas.
Now, my comments about hearing from teacher organizations, not teachers, teacher organizations that needed to be advocating for Senate Bill 9, the Teacher Bill of Rights. We didn't hear enough from the teacher organizations on that. Yes, teachers are busy. Teachers were still here in the Capitol in our hearings. We had many, many education hearings on these subjects, and teachers were front and center, and we were very thankful for that. But the organizations advocating for Senate Bill 9, our Teacher Bill of Rights, were quiet, and because of that, the bill died, and because the bill died, ESAs did not stay separate at the end of the session from teacher pay. And so we need to hear more from teacher organizations when we advance a Teacher Bill of Rights, because what could be more important for public education?
Well, thank you guys so much. It's going to wrap up our conversation. We're going to have some time for some questions. A little bit over, because we went a little bit over. So, Matt, do you want to line up there? Anybody has any questions?
Hey, y'all. My name is Daphne Hoffacker. I'm a public education parent. I watched all the hearings. I watched you guys in action this session. And what struck me was that the testimony, you talked about that you did have separate hearings about the vouchers, sure enough, and the invited testimony was very positive for vouchers, but everybody else was negative. 400 people registered or more against the voucher bill, right, in the background, the people who couldn't come down there, who weren't professionals. I don't get paid to come spend time listening to what's happening down at our Capitol. But over and over, overwhelmingly, people were opposed to vouchers. And so when you say you listen to the parents of Texas, you listen to Governor Abbott, right? You were listening to the parents of Texas.
If you don't have a question,
Yeah, and so my question is, how are parents supposed to trust a state legislature and a state government that for years has been underfunding public education, then has the gall to go around the state and say, hey, is public education not working for you? You underfund it for generations, and then when it is not working as it's supposed to be, you say, let's do another revenue stream for a third type of education system that our government's gonna fund. It's not okay. So my question is, how do we trust that you guys are working in the best interest of our children? You say it, and yet what I hear is you working in the best interest of political ambitions of our governor. So tell me how we trust you. Why do we believe that you really care about what's going on with our children and our classrooms and our teachers based on what we saw this session?
So I first thank you for being in the hearings or watching the hearings and just being a part of the process. And for your question, I was for school choice before the governor named it as an emergency item. So we always look at the statewide leaders and how the legislators might match their sentiment, but really it can be the other way around, right? There's not necessarily a sequence there that you can couple together, because in my district and across the state and through the polling that we see, that's usually adversarial polling. Our moms and dads on the Republican side support school choice at 76%. On the Democrat side, support it at 60%.
I don't think that we're talking about the same thing.
So we might not be, but that's the best way I can interpret your question. So when we have people into the hearings that are against, it is also weighed with in comparison to the volumes and volumes of emails and calls and comments that we get all through the interim. And again, to our very distinguished teacher that's on the panel that mentioned teachers don't have time to come to the Capitol, a lot of moms and dads that are working every day, the only way they can express their sentiment is through emails, calls, and letters, and we get that. So it's not always a tally on the committee report on where we might be making our decisions, and at the end of the day, I'm accountable for that, and I could be pulled out of office for it. So I've got to make a judgment call that really that part doesn't matter to me. I just want to do what I think is right, no matter what a political future might be or a statewide leader might be advocating for.
But
it's
you're
what
saying
I believe
it's Governor
in my
Abbott's
heart.
emergency session, right? You're using Governor Abbott's need for an emergency session, and I actually don't think that that's true. I think that most parents, if they understood what the question about school choice was, if it meant taking our state dollars and giving them to private schools or to parents,
Can we get the next question,
I think
please?
it's, But
Thank
I
you,
just want to say, it's disingenuous. And as a parent, watching all of this go down, it's horrifying.
It's
So
not,
I just want to leave you with that.
It's not disingenuous. It's money that goes to moms and dads, not money that goes to private schools. And moms and dads are going to decide how to direct those dollars that belong to them. So that is exactly the sentiment. Anything else is a narrative that's couched to defeat a certain effort.
Thank you. My name is Stephanie Matthews. I'm with the Texas Association of Business, and obviously an educated and well-prepared workforce is a huge priority for us. Could you speak a little bit about House Bill 8, the Community College Commission on Finance, and sort of the restructuring of how we're going to be focusing now on outcomes-based funding for community colleges and making sure that local community colleges, industry, are working together to have a better prepared and trained workforce. Huge piece of legislation that we supported. It was our #1 priority, and just the work is monumental there. So thank you for your efforts.
And thank you for the Texas Association of Business and what happened across business coalitions throughout the state to bring House Bill 8 forward in its ultimate form that will be a national model on how we fund our community colleges. And I'll be speaking at a national conference later this week on exactly that, with legislators from around the country, just looking at Texas specific, seeing what we're doing going forward to develop a stronger workforce. And one of the superintendent's comments about how integral public schools are for our future workforce, I'm not only thankful for her and her service, but I'm thankful for what public schools are doing for our future workforce. I'm thankful for what our community colleges are doing, because such a huge percentage of our students and adult learners that are seeking a better life are finding that better life through not only public schools, but through the community college effort like I found, and learning a skill and a trade, credit and non-credit courses, and the way that this outcomes-based funding will ultimately result and benefit our community colleges will just be historic going forward. So I'm so excited about what's ahead for the future of our Texas workforce, and I'm excited for it to be a national model for other states to follow.
Just know that we are traveling the state talking about this work, and so thank you again.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to ask a little follow-up on the Senate Bill 8, Senate Bill 9 conversation. First of all, we did, in fact, testify. I'm with ATPE. We did testify on Senate Bill 9. We supported the vast majority of that bill. There were a few provisions which we did not keep secret that we wanted to see changed in the bill, which is why we were on, as opposed to either for or against. But my question is, so am I hearing you say that if the House had passed Senate Bill 9 and not passed Senate Bill 8, that the Senate would have gone ahead and passed Senate Bill 9 even if the attempt to pass vouchers in Senate Bill 8 had failed?
Yeah, no, I don't think you heard me say that at all.
I didn't, but I'm asking.
No, but you said, am I hearing you say, which implies that I said that earlier. No, not at all. I'm saying that the Senate launched the effort to keep those bills separate for a reason, and it would have been very telling if we wouldn't have, right? If we would have coupled those issues together and shown that as our intention all the way through the session. Look, the Senate would prefer for Senate bills on the low bill number, high priority set to pass as intended, or we wouldn't do it. We wouldn't initially chart that path for 100 steps through the legislative process that are just very, very difficult.
But my
to pass
specific
any given
question
bill. So
is,
we don't-
would you have
we don't
passed
know.
Senate Bill 9
Yeah, we don't know.
if you hadn't passed Senate Bill 8? If you had had the opportunity to pass Senate Bill 9 because the House had sent it back over, but the House failed to send back over Senate Bill 8, would you have supported passing Senate Bill 9 without Senate Bill 8 moving?
Yeah, our preference was to keep those bills separate. It could have ended up in the budget. It could have ended up on another vehicle that was germane just to school choice. It could have. Earlier in the session, there were different vehicles that were still alive. So it's speculative. There's no way to know. I don't have an answer for you on that, because that's just not even a hypothetical that was placed in front of me.
Well,
So
as the superintendent mentioned, I think you're going to get another option to keep them separate.
all right, we might have a different option to keep them separate, but because the House killed the bills separately, we also might continue to keep them together. It just depends, because we have to weigh the best risk allocation that we can based on the trends that we saw during the session. You know what they say about doing the same thing over and over and over again to find the same result, right? So we have to decide, should we gamble and keep them separate, or should we put them back together as the session produced that result at the very end, and just weigh the best strategies and the best path forward. Thanks for the question.
So they're telling me this will have to be the last question.
So my name is Joy Diaz, and I wanted to first comment really quickly that when we have emergencies, sometimes we fund them differently. This emergency is funded out with dollars that belong to public education originally, but emergencies such as the border are funded by the billions with other monies, right? We find the money. So here we go. How do we do away with recapture, because it's killing our schools? In Austin ISD, half of our budget goes to recapture. How do you expect us to do something with the money that we get? So all of the panel is in agreement that public education and education in general supports the workforce of Texas. We cannot remain the state of Texas that is, moving forward in every way if our workforce is not the best educated workforce, and we are not investing in that emergency. We're not.
Either one of you.
Well, only because my dissertation was on recapture. So maybe I'll take a stab at recapture. I do think that that's an area that I have heard from legislators that it needs to be revisited. The original design of recapture, which we do need to remember what the design was, because it was a good design. Sometimes things that we design don't always end up actually being executed in the way in which they were designed. But it's called recapture because every kid in Texas, and I'm going to take this point and hope that all of us up here agree to this. Every kid in Texas should be worth the same dollar, whether they live in Roscoe, in Conroe, in Laredo, in Dallas, in Houston. Whether you have a big property base or not should not determine how much money goes into public schools. That should not be the issue. And so the legislature adopted an approach that would, because in essence, school districts, let's remind everybody, we're a pass-through. We're a taxing entity, and the dollars go to the state to get redistributed in an equitable fashion. So the whole equalization approach of finance in schools is to make sure that you don't end up with a school district that doesn't have a good property base like a Dallas ISD does, and therefore dollars. So those dollars were supposed to be, there really weren't Dallas ISD dollars. I do pay recapture, $220 million. This school year, it went up $100 million. Now those dollars are supposed to go into an amount that should then be recaptured to equalize the funding. What we're hearing is that's not the way in which they're being distributed. So we know we're putting monies in. We agree we need to contribute because it shouldn't be fair just because of the tax base. But I think that's such a complex issue that I think we really do, as a school person, I think we have to continue to work on the current, really mandate in front of us on how do we just make it be what our teachers and our educators need right now, just in terms of ensuring we're doing adequate public school funding. And I do think eventually we're gonna have to look at the entire school funding formula. But I think that's from my opinion, I think it's a long way coming.
And I just wanted to add, in very recent sessions for Senate Bill 2 and House Bill 3 and other initiatives, we've shown an intention to diminish the impact of recapture. And we have a lot of work to do to continue forward. We've got discussions on the table. Certainly the governor's mentioned the future of the M&O and just how we fund public schools overall. But all of these synergies tie together. And sometimes you get what you ask for. So we have to make sure that, and I know the superintendent knows what I mean by that, we have to make sure that if we make a significant sea change in exactly how we're funding schools and the effect of recapture, that we like the model that we end up with going forward. And that will just be important for communication and understanding the impact on each individual district and certainly our property taxpayers, and just knowing that that if we jump to a new model, that it will be best for all students. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I think we'll end it there. Thank you guys so much for being here, and I hope you guys also enjoyed it.